Hello, thank you very much for joining my presentation today. My name is Medemkaba T Jamir, and I'm a student at Bangor University pursuing my MSc in Theories of Counseling. The topic of my presentation is men's mental health, examining masculine norms, meaning in life, and well being. So, before beginning, let me just briefly go through what we'll be covering in this presentation. So, for the introduction, I'll be talking a little bit about why I chose this study and some of the existing literature, as well as my hypotheses for this study. The methodology covers how this study was carried out, the procedures, the participants, the design of the study, and the scales used. The results will include the findings, a brief presentation of my findings. Next, the discussions will just be my interpretations of the findings, as well as what that implies for um, theory as well as application in daily life. And finally, we have our references. Okay, so why this study? So, men's mental health personally has been something that I have been interested in for quite a while, especially having experienced my own struggles in the past. And I think that a part of those struggles came from my own beliefs about the roles that I should play, and those were influenced by my upbringing and the contexts in which I was brought up. So, for my dissertation, I was interested in seeing how masculine roles played out in a different context, that is within the UK, and also how different factors, in this case meaning, interacted with masculine roles in order to influence overall mental well being. Masculine norms and behaviors are often generalized in society as toxic behaviors, as toxic beliefs. And this can be quite harmful, especially it can suppress and stop men from seeking support as it blames them and it further stigmatizes men's mental health. So, this study aims to broaden our understanding of the complex nature of this construct. Research also shows that meaning in life is strongly linked to well being. However, there exists very few studies that examine meaning in life, masculine role norms, and well being together within the same model. And there's also very limited focus on their interaction effects and how each variable interacts with one another. So the psychological processes involved may be very individualized and influenced by many factors, hence the need for a more integrated approach. So the aim of this study is to examine the relationships between masculine role norms, meaning in life, and overall well being, with particular focus on direct relationships and moderation effects. So, firstly, what is masculinity? Masculinity is commonly defined as a socially constructed set of norms, roles, and expectations that shape how men are expected to think, feel, and behave. These expectations are often communicated through family, peers, social media, and broader narratives that contribute to the gradual internalization of these masculine ideals. Um, Studies consistently find that these are not a single uniform construct. They include dimensions such as self reliance, success, preoccupation, and dominance. Right, so, research shows mixed outcomes for masculinity and its relationship with well being. While some dimensions of masculinity, such as resilience, primacy for work, and competitiveness may be seen as adaptive and may sometimes act as buffers to physical and mental strains. Other dimensions consistently show negative correlations to well being. One example of that would be in relation to help seeking behaviors, where men who endorse masculine norms may be less likely to seek help and engage in more risky behaviors. And then they may avoid intimate moments of vulnerability for fear of being viewed as weak and effeminate. This unfortunately leads to significantly higher suicide rates in men, with a combination of less help seeking and engaging in more risky activities. Meaning in life is an essential component to well-being and has been consistently found to be linked to positive well-being. Studies show that people who have some form of meaning in their lives are more resilient to different forms of distress and adverse life events. Meaning can be derived from any and all areas, for example, religion, relationships, cultural identity, and so on and so forth. Contemporary research has conceptualized meaning into two dimensions commonly, that is, the presence of meaning and the search for meaning. So now we move on to our hypotheses. So, hypothesis one, presence of masculine norms. It is hypothesized that that would show lower well being. Hypothesis two, the presence of meaning would indicate higher emotional well being. Search for meaning would have more complex outcomes. And hypothesis three, meaning moderates the masculinity well being relationships. But for methodology, all participants were biological males. They were assigned male at birth and have identified as male throughout their life. The sample size was 49 after cleaning the data, and all participants were 18 and above. The age range was from 19 to 61, with the mean being 33.04. The sample was collected from within the UK only. The design of the study was quantitative and it was cross-sectional. The To analyze the data, Spearman's rank correlation as well as a regression analysis was run. The measures used in the study, there were three measures used in the study. The first one is the masculine role norms inventory. The second is the meaning in life questionnaire. And the third one is the PERMA profiler. Under the masculine role norms inventory, we have success preoccupation, inhibited affection, and restrictive emotionality. So these are three subscales under that we would be exploring further. For procedure, the participants were recruited via SONA, Student Participation Panel, and also online and through social media platforms. The data was collected via Site Toolkit. The participants initially were provided information of the study. Once they click on the link, then they go through to complete a consent form, after which they are led into the main study. At the end of the study, they are provided with a debrief form and the study ends. All right, so for the results, there were not many significant relationships found in the results. So for masculine norms and well-being, there were no significant relationships. Restrictive emotionality did suggest a negative trend. However, it was not very significant and it was a very weak negative trend. Meaning in life and well-being, the presence of meaning did show higher well-being as well as higher positive emotions. As you can see, the correlation coefficient values as well as the significance in the bracket. Then we have the search for meaning and did produce mixed findings. There was an increase in negative emotion, very weak increase in negative emotion, and it was also not it was not statistically significant, and there was no link to positive emotion. For moderation analysis, there were no significant interaction effects found. All right, so let's discuss our findings. So the findings being not statistically significant for the most part is supported by research, and the findings suggest that a more indirect and context-dependent relationship between all variables is actually what exists. So this means that instead of looking at masculinity as a single construct, we should study their dimensions specifically and within specific contexts in order to have a more nuanced understanding of how all these variables interact with each other and affect each other. Masculinity is multidimensional with different norms influencing outcomes differently. There, it may be moderated by other constructs such as religion. A study showed how some men find religion as a way to be able to embrace more contemporary forms of masculinity within certain societies, while some men find that religion motivates them to further adhere to traditional masculine norms, and some even to the extent of committing violent crimes. Then emotional restriction may limit emotional awareness, and then the subconscious avoidance of emotional intimacy takes place. However, it's important to know that the effects of masculinity on well-being may depend on how these norms are internalized within an individual. So, for example, with success preoccupation, it may be dependent on whether the goals that are set are intrinsically motivated or whether they come from some extrinsic source, such as peer pressure, parents, or a boss. In that case, a person who is intrinsically motivated to achieve may associate more positive emotions with success preoccupation, while the other person who is more extrinsically motivated or rather pressured may experience more negative association with it. Another point it would be on whether it is congruent to the identity and values of the person. So if certain norms or traits and beliefs within masculine norms align with the identity of the person, then it is more likely to be associated with positive emotions. Meaning and emotional well-being. So the presence of meaning, as found in our findings, has been consistently shown to reduce negative emotional experiences even in existing research. The search for meaning being more complex may indicate a lack of direction as opposed to determination. It could be that instead of being motivated to find meaning, the person is actually more confused and not very in tune with their sense of self. It may also be that they are in a state of meaning diffusion, as Steger et al. States, or they may be going through a specific life transition event or a moment in which the meaning that they held onto has been challenged and they need to push through that in order to find it once again. Similar to the relationship that masculinity and well-being share, it is dependent on contextual factors. One study found that Eastern cultures, owing to their dialectical thinking, were able to accept the coexistence of the presence of meaning and the search for meaning without negatively affecting their well being, as opposed to in Western cultures, where there appeared to be an either or form of thinking. And so it was either meaning existed or they had to search for meaning, in which case there was more negative emotions and negative mental well being associated with the search for meaning. Okay, so limitations of the study. So, owing to the relatively smaller sample size of the study as compared to the others within existing literature, the findings of this study have been interpreted with caution. The design of the study, being cross sectional as well, is to be taken into consideration. The limited range of dimensions within the utilized scale, for example, the masculine role inventory, having three subscales, is also to be taken into consideration as a limitation. Okay, implications of the study. Theoretical implications. Contemporary masculinity reflects evolving and more flexible role norms. The popularization of contemporary masculinity shows that men are willing to be more flexible with their norms, provided that there is a safe space for them to do so, and the traits do align with their identity and are congruent to who they are. As such, future research should further examine identity congruence and specific contextual factors to understand how they influence the masculinity well being relation. So, implications for practice. Masculine norms can be both supportive and restrictive depending on individual experience. Broad labels such as toxic masculinity may oversimplify complex behaviors, and such the study highlights the need for an individualized and context-sensitive support to each person. If you stayed to the end of the presentation, thank you very much for listening, and please pause and view the references for your use if you would like to do so. Thank you. Bye bye.